Right now, more than 300,000 people across Europe don't have a home to go back to. Not because of a war. Not because of an earthquake, because of fire. Entire towns have been evacuated in hours, and this week, officials in 3 different countries admitted, on the record, that these fires are currently beyond their capacity to control. Let me walk you through exactly what's happening across Spain, France, and Italy right now, why it's happening simultaneously in 3 countries, and what comes next. Let's start with Spain, because what's happening around Madrid is genuinely serious. The Spanish government activated a national emergency declaration, escalating this beyond a regional response after fires grew so large and moved so fast that regional authorities couldn't manage them alone. The worst of it is burning west of Madrid, near the border between the Madrid region and the province of Avila, where 2 separate large fires have grown close enough together along a roughly 15-kilometer stretch that they're effectively merging into one continuous fire front. Spain's military emergency unit, the country's elite disaster response force, took command of the firefighting effort, deploying more than 2,700 personnel, over 400 ground vehicles, and 21 aircraft, with additional crews arriving from Greece, Italy, and Portugal. The Madrid emergency chief described the fire as being at its peak and said, plainly, that it's currently beyond the capacity of firefighters to fully contain. That's not language officials use casually. So far, close to 10,000 hectares have burned in the Madrid region alone, with another 13,000 to 15,000 hectares gone in neighboring Avila. A separate fire near Guadalajara has burned roughly 32,000 hectares and forced dozens of villages to evacuate. In total, more than 30 separate forest fires are burning across Spain at the same time. Evacuation orders cover more than 10,000 residents in the Madrid and Avila areas combined, with tens of thousands more affected nationwide, and at least 1 death has been reported. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez visited the emergency command post and warned that difficult hours remain ahead, since even with temperatures easing slightly, winds remain unpredictable. It's worth understanding why fire this size burning this close to a major European capital is unusual. Spain has dealt with serious summer fires for decades, mostly concentrated in the south and along the Mediterranean coast. The fires currently burning west of Madrid are in the central mountain landscapes surrounding the capital, terrain that had generally been considered lower risk because of its elevation and distance from the hotter, drier south. Fire of this scale reaching that region represents a real geographic shift in where the risk is showing up, one Spanish emergency planners are actively adjusting to. The decision to hand command to the military emergency unit rather than civilian fire services is itself a signal. That unit exists specifically for catastrophic scenarios, where civilian capacity is overwhelmed and coordinated operations are needed. Across multiple agencies at once, it isn't deployed for routine fire events. Now to France, where the numbers are, if anything, more startling. Fires in the Gironde department in the southwest near the Atlantic coast have forced the evacuation of roughly 200,000 people, with tens of thousands more displaced by separate fires elsewhere. Officials are describing this as one of the largest peacetime evacuations France has ever conducted, and the qualifier peacetime is doing real work in that sentence, since evacuations of this scale in France have historically been associated with wartime displacement. The fires tearing through the Gironde are burning through the land's forest, the largest forested area in Western Europe, a largely artificial forest planted in the 19th century to stabilize sandy coastal dunes composed predominantly of maritime pine. Maritime pine is among the most fire-prone tree species in Europe. Its resins and oils burn readily. It drops needle litter that builds up as ground fuel, and it grows in dense stands that let fire travel rapidly from canopy to canopy. That combination is essentially a vast ready store of fuel. The resort area around Liege Cap Ferret on the Atlantic coast was ordered to evacuate, with emergency alerts sent directly to residents' phones telling people in at least 5 communities to move toward Bordeaux immediately. Shelters in Bordeaux are packed. It's worth noting that Liege Cap Ferret is largely a seasonal resort community. Many of the people evacuated were tourists and summer residents, unfamiliar with local evacuation routes, caught in an emergency system that had to move an unusually large, unfamiliar population very quickly. A separate blaze near Biscarrosi and Parentis and Born burned more than 2,500 hectares on its own and triggered over 23,000 additional evacuations. In at least one village, residents who returned to check on their properties found only charred ruins. The fire had moved through in the time it took them to reach a shelter and come back. France appealed for international help, and 8 countries, Romania, Croatia, Germany, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic, sent emergency personnel. The French government deployed Canadair water bombers, Dash firefighting planes, military cargo aircraft dropping retardant, and water-carrying helicopters, combining civilian and military resources into a single operation. At least 1 death has been reported in the French fires, and authorities are warning that drought, low humidity, and unpredictable winds mean these fires could surge again with little notice. One detail worth understanding: the Gironde sits at the edge of Bordeaux wine country, one of the most economically significant agricultural landscapes on Earth. Wine experts have said the vineyards themselves haven't been directly destroyed, and that this year's grapes aren't yet developed enough to fully absorb smoke taint, a phenomenon where grapes absorb wildfire smoke and the resulting wine is permanently affected. But that assessment comes with real uncertainty attached, since the fires are still active and the smoke is still hanging over the region. The outcome for this year's vintage isn't yet determined. Now to Italy, where the crisis looks different but comes from the same underlying cause. Sicily has recorded more than 1,000 individual firefighting interventions since the middle of this month alone. A firefighter died battling a blaze near Catenanuova. Large active fires are burning near Bafia, with more than 6,500 hectares burned, and near Risultano, with more than 3,000 more. Sardinia is dealing with separate emergencies, including a fire near Agrigento that forced beach closures and shut down coastal roads. Sicily's situation is compounded by something worth understanding. The island has had serious fire seasons in each of the last several summers, and forests and scrubland burned in earlier years haven't fully recovered. When fire moves through landscapes still in early-stage recovery, it burns differently. Soil is more exposed. Root systems that would normally hold hillside soil in place are weaker, and erosion risk during autumn and winter rainfall increases significantly afterward. Sicily's agricultural landscape, including almond orchards, citrus groves, and olive cultivation, faces compounding damage from successive fire seasons without adequate recovery time in between. In northern Italy, the crisis takes a different shape but traces back to the same root cause. The Po River, Italy's longest river and the water source for millions of people and thousands of farms in the Po Valley, has dropped to record low levels because of persistent heat and drought. Municipalities in the Piedmont region have introduced fines for using drinking water to wash cars or water gardens. This is genuine water rationing in one of the wealthiest, most industrially productive regions of Europe. Italy has already recorded tens of thousands of hectares burned this year nationally, well above the 20-year average, with elevated fire risk continuing across Sicily, Sardinia, Calabria, and parts of the Alpine Arc stretching into the north. Here's what ties all 3 countries together, and why this matters as one story rather than 3 coincidental ones. The driver behind every one of these fires is the same relentless heat wave that settled over southern and western Europe and refused to move record temperatures. Vegetation dried out enough to ignite from a single spark, and winds that shift direction without warning, turning a fire that was being managed into a runaway blaze within minutes. It's worth explaining why fires like this are behaving differently from the fires Europe dealt with 20 or 30 years ago. It's not simply that temperatures are higher, it's that the combination of conditions that produces a serious fire has become dramatically more likely to occur at the same time. Europe has been getting drier for years, and drought cycles that used to last weeks and then break with rain are now lasting months. When soil and vegetation dry out to this extent, fire risk doesn't rise gradually, it escalates sharply. Mildly dry vegetation is harder to ignite than wet vegetation. Severely dry vegetation behaves like tinder, and even a small spark can spread rapidly because everything around it is already primed to burn. The wind component is what makes containment so difficult, even with the resources being deployed. Firefighters can build fire breaks and use aircraft to drop water and retardant, and those methods generally work, but when wind shifts, a fire break protecting one side of a community can suddenly find the fire behind it instead. New fronts open, resources have to be repositioned, and in the time that takes, more land burns. The erratic winds officials have been warning about aren't some unusual factor, making this particular fire season worse than expected. They're a standard feature of summer fire weather in southern Europe, and they're exactly why it's so hard to get ahead of a large fire once it's established itself in mountainous or forested terrain. What does this mean going forward? The honest answer is that the risk doesn't end once the current fires are controlled, which could still take days or weeks. The drought conditions behind this week's fires won't fully recover before next summer. Europe appears to be entering a period where fire seasons run longer, burn more intensely, and reach areas that weren't previously considered high risk. Fires near one of the world's most famous wine regions, fires within sight of a major European capital. This isn't remote wilderness burning. This is inhabited Western Europe. The response has been extraordinary in scale. Spain mobilizing its military, France conducting its largest peacetime evacuation in generations, Italy managing simultaneous crises across multiple regions, and mutual aid flowing between 8 European nations because no single country has the resources to handle this alone. But every official statement from Madrid, Bordeaux, and Rome this week carries the same caveat. Full control isn't possible until the weather changes. And the weather isn't expected to change soon. If you're in Spain, France, Italy, or anywhere in Southern Europe right now, follow the instructions of local civil protection authorities without waiting to see how things develop. Evacuation orders are issued when officials believe staying puts you at immediate risk. And in several cases during this crisis, the fires have moved faster than the evacuation orders themselves. The people who left early were the ones who had time. The people who waited had to be rescued. If you're watching from elsewhere and want to help, donating to verified emergency response and relief organizations working in the affected regions is genuinely useful. The scale of this crisis means recovery will take years, well past the point this story stops making headlines. Firefighters from 8 countries are working through the night right now, in conditions where the air itself is dangerous. Officials have stood in front of cameras and said plainly that they cannot yet stop what's burning. That's where things stand today. This story isn't close to over. Stay with it. Another important point is that wildfire damage doesn't end when the flames are finally extinguished. In many ways, fire itself marks the beginning of a much longer recovery process. Burned landscapes become vulnerable to entirely different hazards that can persist for months or even years after the smoke clears. One of the biggest concerns is soil stability. Intense fires don't just burn trees and shrubs. They can also alter the upper layer of soil, reducing its ability to absorb rainfall. Instead of soaking into the ground, heavy rain runs rapidly downhill, increasing the risk of flash flooding and debris flows. That's a pattern firefighters and emergency planners have seen repeatedly across southern Europe. Areas that suffer severe wildfires during the summer often face dangerous flooding during the first major autumn storms. Burned hillsides lose much of the vegetation that normally slows runoff, allowing water, rocks, and mud to rush into valleys with very little warning. The ecological recovery is equally slow. Mediterranean forests have evolved alongside fire for thousands of years, and many native species can eventually regenerate after a blaze. But recovery depends heavily on how often fires return. When the same landscape burns repeatedly within only a few years, young vegetation may never have enough time to mature before the next fire arrives. That repeated cycle gradually changes the landscape itself. Forests can become dominated by lower-growing shrubs instead of mature trees. Wildlife habitats shrink or become fragmented. Soil loses nutrients. Over time, ecosystems that once recovered naturally begin struggling to return to their previous condition. The economic effects extend well beyond firefighting costs. Tourism, agriculture, forestry, and local businesses all depend on landscapes that remain safe and accessible. Road closures, smoke pollution, damaged infrastructure, and evacuation orders can disrupt entire regional economies during the busiest months of the year. For communities built around seasonal tourism, the timing makes recovery especially difficult. Summer normally represents the period when hotels, restaurants, and local businesses earn much of their annual income. Even areas untouched by flames can experience cancellations simply because visitors associate the wider region with dangerous conditions. Agriculture faces similar uncertainty. Farmers dealing with prolonged drought must balance limited water supplies against crops already stressed by extreme temperatures. Even where flames never reach cultivated land, heat alone can reduce yields, increase irrigation demands, and place additional pressure on already stretched water resources. Scientists also continue studying how repeated heat waves influence future fire behavior. Extremely hot conditions remove moisture from grasses, shrubs, and forests much earlier in the season than was historically common. Instead of a relatively short fire season concentrated around the hottest weeks of summer, some regions are now experiencing elevated fire danger stretching across several months. That places sustained pressure on firefighters, aircraft crews, emergency managers, and local governments responsible for maintaining readiness throughout the season. International cooperation has therefore become increasingly important. Fires no longer remain isolated national emergencies when multiple neighboring countries face extreme conditions simultaneously. In the end, this story is about far more than individual wildfires. It's about how prolonged heat, persistent drought, and increasingly complex fire conditions are reshaping emergency planning across southern Europe. The firefighters working on these front lines aren't simply responding to isolated incidents. The coming weeks will determine how quickly these individual fires are brought under control. The coming years will determine how Europe adapts to the conditions making events like these more frequent. Both questions remain open, and both will continue shaping the continent long after the last flames are finally extinguished.